Hopefully it goes through. It does say that it's now being streamed live on Facebook. So I know we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Inshallah, we'll know in about 20 seconds if this actually worked or not. So Sister Shabnam's husband is going to be giving us a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Nothing yet.
It might take maybe a few more seconds to show up. Hopefully, inshallah. Um, let's just hang tight. Oh, I think I see it myself. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We're live.
Yes. Are we
We're
live?
live. Do you see
Okay.
it? No? Are you on
I
the
see
right
it.
stream?
I see it.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay,
Well, he
bismillah.
must be in the wrong stream, so no
Yeah.
problem.
Okay,
Alhamdulillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are hosting this live stream on understanding Shia and Sunni perspectives on Ashura. So today actually is Ashura, and we have invited, sorry?
Tomorrow is Ashura.
Oh, tomorrow. So tonight. So starting tonight at Maghrib. So we've actually invited our past Khateebahs, Sister Shabnam Dewji and Ann Myers, who both delivered khutbahs on Ashura from the Shia and the Sunni perspective a few years ago. And if you guys have been keeping up with our live stream, with our newsletter for the Women's Mosque of America, we have been recently releasing all of our videos. And it just so happened that the last two videos that we had to release were the two of theirs. And it was going to happen, coincide with Ashura. So we were very happy to coordinate this live stream event for you. And if you guys have any questions, please just comment them in the comments below. And then Samia, our Director of Operations, is going to be taking a look at that, and she'll let us know if those questions come up. So first of all, could you each give me just a brief bio? I know I don't have your updated bio. If you guys can give a brief introduction of yourselves. Whoever wants to go first, don't be polite.
Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. All right. My name is Ann Myers. I was the former Director of Operations for the Women's Mosque of America from 2017 to 2018, right before Samia started. I'm currently a senior library clerk at a public library in Albany, New York. I did my undergraduate degree at Wellesley College and did a master's degree at Harvard Divinity School, where I studied Islamic studies, Islamic chaplaincy, and that has led me to do library work, and inshallah, one day in the future, I'll be a chaplain.
Allah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, I'm obviously live in Southern California, and I miss you, Ann. You used to be here, and now you've gone. I have been involved with my community, also known as Sijla, in Pico Rivera for a number of years. I've served as the vice president on the board there, a treasurer. And in the last decade, I have devoted my life to interfaith activities, intra and interfaith, along with my husband, who is very active in that arena. We hope every day that every effort we make creates more understanding between people. Nobody has ever said we cannot coexist differently. We just have to respect and treat each other the way we would want to be treated. Having said that, I've been the principal of the Sunday school at Sijla for the last maybe just 2 decades now. I don't know. I stopped counting, but it is my joy and pleasure, and that's what I do. My full-time job is in technology. I work for AT&T right now, and it keeps me very busy, and I just became a grandma, which is a wonderful feeling. So that's enough about me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Samia, you can give a bio as well.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum salam.
My name is Samia, and other than being the Director of Operations for the Women's Mosque of America, I'm a happiness expert. So I teach people how to be happy. And yeah, it's just really my joy to be here with you all.
Alhamdulillah. And you also have had a lot of experience with interfaith work as well, right?
Yes, I love engaging in interfaith dialogue and community building. That's the thing I do for fun.
Awesome. So my name is Hasna Maznavi. I'm the founder and president of the Women's Mosque of America, which is the nation's first women-led Muslim house of worship. And as you can see, we have so many lovely women who have been a part of our project over the years, both internally and also as Khateebahs. And so it really is a community of amazing women, and really we invite you to come to our events, once we open up again, subscribe to our newsletter, watch all of our khutbah videos on YouTube. We really have so much untapped potential within our ummah, and it's important that we really highlight these voices and the perspectives that come from them. So today we're really happy to be hosting this event. And it just so happens that today coincides with the March on Washington, MLK's March on Washington. As we'll see today when we're discussing this issue of Shia and Sunni unity, and particularly on Ashura, this concept of justice and of looking at the past in light of that justice is really relevant. So first of all, I just want to ask both of you, Anne and Shabnam, what were your sort of reactions that you got the day that you delivered your khutbah and your bayan? And I know it was a few years ago, but how did people generally react? Like, was it what you expected, or what were they saying to you?
Well, for me, I remember that I was completely humbled. For most people, it was probably the first time then they expressed that to me, that they'd even heard about the granddaughters of the Prophet and the family that experienced that day of Ashura. And in many cases, it was educational for them and building a new beginning of understanding what that day really meant for the Shias. So I remember that feedback, but I also have to share my feedback after Anne's khutbah. My feedback was, first of all, there were some things that Anne shared I had no idea that is what the Sunnis do on the day of Ashura. So it was a learning moment for me that I, to this day, cannot stop praying for Anne because she educated me that day, alhamdulillah. So that's what I remember of that day.
Awesome.
I unfortunately don't really remember reactions from other people, but I do remember my reaction listening to Sister Shabnam's khutbah, and I had some knowledge about Shia Islam and Ashura and Karbala, but just listening to her khutbah really made me just hungry to learn more. There was so much that I didn't know about my own history as a Muslim, our own history as a Muslim, about these figures, the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and just how much I personally was missing out on knowing these people and having a relationship with these people and these events. And for that, I'm really grateful, very grateful, because I mentioned in my bayan, as a Sunni, when I first started learning about Islam, I learned from the Sunni perspective, and this just wasn't something that was taught to me. I had to learn it from a friend of mine in college who was Shia, and mentioned Ashura to me. because otherwise, you know, I might have never even known. And, you know, I think that would have, you know, that's just a real disadvantage for anyone that doesn't know about Ashura and Karbala.
Yeah, so if you haven't already watched their videos, I really encourage you to do so. So Anne's pre-khutbah bayan was on understanding Shia and Sunni perspectives on Ashura. And then I just want to get the title correctly. So then Shabnam's, Sister Shabnam's khutbah was on the Prophet's granddaughter and Muslim women leaders of Karbala. Just a quick note on that, why we do the bayan and the khutbah. And how that ties into pluralism and how we can work together, you know, as Shias and Sunnis. So one of the things that we have at the Women's Mosque of America is we have a very strong middle ground policy, and that's our strongest value. And so what this means is that no matter what we do, we always want to do it in a way where we can be inclusive of as many Muslims as possible. So when we first started out and we realized that there were some Muslim women who had a difference of opinion on the matter of prayer, of women-led prayer, particularly in terms of the khutbah, the Friday khutbah, what we did was we came up with a system to make sure that no matter what your perspective is, you still can speak to our congregation. And no matter what your perspective is, you still can participate in a way where you don't feel like you are ever compromising on your religious values or your beliefs. And, you know, some people might think, oh, you know, is that an innovation, the four-letter word bid'ah? No, it's not actually. You know, if you go into Islamic history, at a certain point in Islamic history, actually, there were, I believe, 4 or 5 different prayers that were happening simultaneously around the Kaaba for each different, well, I believe it was for each different Sunni madhab, but they were doing this simultaneous prayers in the same space as a way to share that space, but also hold on to each other, or hold on to their own values. And so with that, why don't we just take a moment and hear just a brief overview of the Sunni perspective on Ashura and its significance, and then also the Shia view. So Anne, why don't you start off, and then Sister Shabnam, you can go next.
Okay. So the Sunni perspective of Ashura, it's mostly based on 2 different hadiths, or sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. One of them is that the Prophet came across a group of Jews who were fasting on the day of Ashura, which is the 10th day of the month of Muharram. We're in the month of Muharram now. And he asked, this group, you know, what are you doing? And they said, we're fasting today. Today's a good day. It's the day that Prophet Moses, and the children of Israel were freed from slavery from Pharaoh. So after the Prophet heard this, he decided to fast that day also, and encouraged the Muslims also to fast. And then there is another hadith on the merit of Ashura and fasting Ashura, and how it will, if you fast the day of Ashura, your sins from the previous year will be forgiven. So it's highly recommended to fast this day of Ashura. It's not a required fast, but if you are able to do it, it's a highly recommended act of worship. I believe at one point it was even considered a required fast. This was before the revelation on fasting during the month of Ramadan. So before the Ramadan fast, the Ashura fast was something that the Muslims did. And there is, you know, Sunnis, obviously, like we do, you know, love and respect Imam Hussein and acknowledge that the Battle of Karbala happened that day and that Imam Hussein was martyred on that day. But I would say, in general, Sunnis don't do any specific observance related to the Battle of Karbala and this martyrdom. It's mostly the main act of worship for Sunnis on Ashura is fasting.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, I'm not an Islamic scholar or like a scholar of Islam in a secular academic sense, but this is just as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Sister Shabnam?
So in the Shia perspective of the day of Ashura, it was a day of sacrifice for the grandson of the Prophet and his family. And the circumstances around it is one thing that I think we don't do a good job in education. And that is keeping in mind what the political situation was at that time. That the political situation at that time, nearly 50 years after the death of the Holy Prophet, had become deteriorated. You know, the Khilafat of the first 4 Khalifas had ended with Imam Ali's Khilafat. And after that, it was the Muawiyah and the Umayyad dynasty that took over. And just the very term of dynasties, whether it was the Umayyad or the Abbasid following the Umayyad, the history of Islam after that had become under these kind of governorships. So things had deteriorated. And our holy Imam Hussein, it was like a choice that was given to him. Do you pay allegiance to Yazid, who was the Umayyad, proclaimed Umayyad Khalifa of the Muslims, or not? And when he looked at the actions of the government at the time, and he realized these are not people who represent my grandfather. And so he did a khutbah in Medina before he left in the month of the Hajj. And he said, I am leaving the city of my beloved grandfather to go towards Kufa, where the people had invited him, to reform the message of my grandfather because it has been lost. And as he was assessing, because Yazid required his allegiance and he was not going to give that, he said, people like me cannot do allegiance with people like him. And so I am on my way to reform. And he took his family with him. So it wasn't a battle, it wasn't a planned war or anything like that. He was just standing up against what at that time was not a good situation for the Muslims. I mean, the government of Muawiyah was indulging in acts that were haram in our faith. And so that was the reason he stood up. So on that day of Ashura, when the entire family of the Holy Prophet, all of the male members, most of them, were annihilated and murdered and tortured, and in your lecture, in your bayan, I remember you using the word mutilated because it was that way. The Shias on the day of Ashura observe that day as a vigil. It is highly recommended to fast in the first 9 days of the Hajj, of Muharram. But the 10th day, because fasting is seeking pleasure with Allah, the 10th day, the Shias, because we use it as a day of mourning and vigil, we do not fast because it is not a happy occasion. And you will find most of us on this day, we will start our day with prayers. We read chapters of the Quran that remind us of injustice and how to treat the family of the Prophet. 3 of the common chapters that we read on that day are Surah Ahzab and Surah Al-Kafirun and Surah Al-Munafiqun. And then we do a maqtal. Maqtal is actually the story time. We narrate the events of that day on the day of Ashura, from the sunrise with the start of the Fajr Adhan until Asr, when the Imam was murdered and beheaded. And so at that point, the day ends of the battle itself or the conclusion. So our observance ends on that at that time. And then at our centers, you'll find most people will either do poetry, lamentation. We either go visit the cemetery because it is more of a reflection on ultimately where am I headed, even if you have no one buried in that cemetery. You'll find the entire day is spent that way. And we come back, and right before Maghrib, we do another session of reflection, because at that time we remember the women and children of Karbala, because at that, as night dawned for them, it was a very difficult night for them. So we spend the day in a vigil, in a solemn vigil, paying tribute to the Imam and his family.
Thank you for that. You know, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, you know, my own journey, learning about Shia Islam and learning about just Islamic history in general. And I do want to preface this and say that I do not call myself a Sunni. I don't identify as Sunni or Shia. I very purposely only call myself a Muslim or mu'min, just for my own beliefs that, you know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, only called himself a Muslim and mu'min, so a believer and a submitter. So I don't subscribe to either label. That said, I was brought up in the Sunni theology. And I remember in high school, a non-Muslim friend was like, oh, are you a Sunni or Shia? And I was like, I don't know. And there was a girl, a Muslim friend of mine, who overheard, and she was like, oh, trust me, you're Sunni. I was like, I don't think so. I am just Muslim. And so that was very, you know, then as I got to college, and actually growing up in our mosque, we would see Shias, we would know they were Shias because they would pray with their hands down. But other than that, I was completely ignorant. And then when I got to college, I had Shia friends in our MSA. Everyone was together again. And I found out at a certain point that the Shias were having a separate jumma'a. And I told my friend, I remember I was saying, oh my God, that's crazy. Why are they doing, you know, why are we having separate Sunni and Shia jumma'as? We should have one. And I was literally like getting up because I was gonna go and try and get them to combine, naively thinking like, oh, they just don't know that, you know, we're having duplicate jummas. Someone needs to tell them. And then my friend stopped me and she was like, no, you can't do that. You can't pray behind a Shia. And I was like, why not? And she just couldn't explain it to me. Then from there, I think I went to one of my Shia's friends' mom had passed away, and I went to an event at her mosque. And that was the first time I had heard Ali Wali Allah after the Shahada. And that was my first time really understanding, oh, there are some pretty significant differences, even though I had grown up hearing there aren't, you know, it's just a political difference. It's not a big deal. And then from there, I think as I got older and in grad school, joined an intra-faith halakha where the wife leading it was Sunni and the husband was Shia. Literally half of our halakas were always Sunni and Shia. And one night there was just this big debate, and it went on until I think 3 a.m. And afterwards, it was the first time in my life I just felt, you know, I just felt horrible to be a Muslim. I was like, what is this? I didn't know that there was this type of division, and I didn't know that the feelings were so strong on either side. And so from there, I did my own research, and I tried to read as many books as I could on just that lost history. And the book that really changed the game for me was Destiny Disrupted by Tamim Ansari. So he is a historian who was working in the US educational system in Texas, and, you know, creating history books for school and for American schools, and saw that the Islam chapter was so tiny, even though the Islamic empire was so huge and spanned for so many hundreds of years. but he kept getting met with resistance every time he would want to add more Islamic history into world history books. And so finally he wrote this book, Destiny Disrupted. And in my struggle to try and find, how did the Shia Sunni split begin? That was my question. This was the book that really laid it out in the least biased way possible, and I felt in the most even-handed way possible. So I want to recommend that book to everybody because it really gave light to both sides of what happened. And essentially what I got from it was that, or what was surprising to me was that, after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, there were disagreements about, who should lead next. And obviously whoever was going to lead next wasn't going to lead as a prophet, but they were going to lead the community. That is actually not what started the Shia Sunni split. The Shia Sunni split started when there were these leaders who were mistreating Muslims and mistreating people in the Prophet's family. And it was several years after that, I think even 100 years after that, that split began as a reaction to the injustices of that day. So even in the book, it talks about how, Ali, the cousin of the Prophet and son-in-law, and Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, were squared off about to engage in battle with one another. And they both met that night and had peace talks, and they both agreed to not fight. And it was actually people within their camps that started fighting and began the battle against the leaders, against Ali and Aisha's instructions. So I really encourage, everyone to read that book, because I think what we are seeing, not only in terms of Shia Sunni unity, but even in terms of just the lost history of Muslim women leaders in Islam, and how there were tens of thousands of Muslim women scholars who led our ummah. We are completely ignorant of our history as a whole, and we're really missing out. So I wanted to hear from you guys, maybe all three of you. Can you talk about, your introduction to the split between Shia and Sunni Islam? How did that happen? How early, and what were your thoughts at the time, and how has that evolved since then?
Well, for me, in my perspective, and what I've always learned growing up and even to this day, is that you're right, there was no Sunni, Shia, there was no label on any Muslim, and the Quran is very clear about that as well, that in the eyes of Allah, the person who is most God conscious and righteous is the one who is the highest elevated. So it is not about our labels, much like it is not about our origins and color of skin, etc. My understanding is that it all started after the death of the Prophet. There are certain qualities that I have come to understand, whether it is in this era we live in our presidency that we're in, or even before that people there are certain things that we just, they're negative traits in us, whether it is greed or power or control. When you are a leader, there are certain qualities of a leader we should look at. And of all the people, the Prophet would have wanted that, because he said there is not going to be a prophet after me. And this is till the end of time. Now, prior to that, so many prophets, so many scriptures. And how was he going to leave his world without any support? So it was very important for him to make things very clear what his needs are. According to the tafsir and the historic narrations, there are several events prior to his death that he said, the most righteous amongst me is Ali. He grew up with me. He was in the household of the revelation, He's married to my daughter, and he will be your leader after you. So in his point of view, that's where the religion would have been sustained. Nonetheless, history took a different turn. Again, there were several companions, and mashallah, all of them were close to the Prophet. And so each one of them felt that they were entitled to that next chapter in their lives. Fast forward a few years, and now we're at the fourth Khilafat, when Imam Ali now is the Khalifa of the Muslims. And he is now establishing his government in the city of Kufa. He moved it from Medina because there was a lot of, he had insight on what was going on in Damascus, in that area, where the people who were power play, that was happening over there. And Muawiyah was, an arch enemy, of the Imam. And he was also, his father, Abu Sufyan, was the same with the Prophet. So the history and the legacy of power and control carried over. And there was a lot, and when we read history, no matter which perspective we read, and by the way, there are so many different lenses we can all look at history, because look at today, huh? If it's Fox News or CNN, somebody's going to say that's history. And so we have to be mindful of whose lens we are reading the history. And so at that time, the history records, no matter which perspective you look at, that these rulers were tyrants, and that was not right. So the way I have learned is, you're right, the labeling didn't come much later. And in fact, I loved your story about going to the masjid of the Shia mosque and hearing the Ashhadu anna Aliyun Waliyullah. The history behind that is, there was a time when Muawiyah would pay or threaten the muaddins to curse Imam Ali at the pulpit during the adhan. And so when you are going to do that in the adhan, it was the followers of Ali who said, we must make it known that Ali was the waliya, the word wilaya, which is the inheritor of the Prophet's message. And so that's how it all started, Now, is that relevant today? I agree with you. It doesn't need to be, but because we don't understand our history, we focus on things we don't even understand. Instead of I applaud you, really, Hasna. I applaud you for taking that move. And I've written the name of this book because I'm going to read it now.
It's amazing.
It's amazing, yeah.
And I didn't share really what my turning point was. And I think, I did have that discomfort, I'll admit, when I first heard that phrase. Thank you for sharing the origin of it, because that lightens the load of what it can mean when you're first hearing it to someone who's raised with Sunni theology. Really, for me, the change came from, I took a trip to Iran in 2012 for a film festival that one of my short films had made it into. And while I was there, I wanted to visit, different cities. And so I went to Mashhad, which is one of the Shia holy sites. I believe it's has the tomb of Imam Reza, correct? And so when I went there and my plane was touching down in Mashhad, I'm someone who I do dhikr all the time. So remembrance of God, saying subhanallah, glory be to God, or alhamdulillah. I'm always trying to say those things all the time, but I never say it while moving my tongue and like in my mouth. It's more of just something in my head. But I kid you not, like as we were touching, the plane was touching down, I felt something come over me, and my tongue started moving with salawat of the Prophet, and praising and blessing the Prophet. And I felt, this is what I have been missing out on. And I think that was such a powerful experience for me, because, we can theorize all we want, we can talk about history all we want, but once you experience that love of the Prophet in your heart, it opens you up and transforms you and humbles you in a way. And so that was kind of the first opening for me, where I saw, oh my God, there's something out there that I have been deprived of, an experience and a connection to the Prophet that the Sunni path of theology does not give us. And the second thing, I think the breaking point for me was I went for jumma'a at the University of Tehran, and there are thousands of people there. And I was sitting in the women's section, and actually the jumma'a there is women on the right and men on the left, and they have a barrier in the middle, but it is, equal sitting. And once the prayer was over and the women around me found out that I was from America, then they were just flooding me with love, and they were like, oh, my sister lives in Chicago, like all of this stuff, right? And people were coming, and they were just taking, like, they had little bits of candy in their purses, they were just dropping it in front of me. And the woman sitting next to me, she didn't have anything to give me. She had a little pin pinning her scarf, and she took it off of her scarf and she put it on me, and she said, you are a perfect Muslim. And when she said that, I felt so ashamed, because I felt I didn't realize I had arrogance until she said that. And of course, I'm not a perfect Muslim. None of us are. But for her to have the humility to say that and put that label on me showed me just how not a perfect Muslim I was, by thinking that and not consciously thinking that I was better, but thinking that I had the right way and the other way was wrong. And I think that's what finally split my heart open. And I was like, okay, this is all, we are all Muslim. We are all, I think the best metaphor I ever heard is that God, if you imagine someone is hosting a party and invites people who they love to that party, and then a few of the people within that party start to fight, who will God love more? The people who join the fight, or the people who try to break up the fight out of honor for the host? And so I think we really have to think about, yes, these things have happened in our history, but where we are today, we really need to focus on the one who brought us all here on this earth, and try our best to stay together and heal our broken bonds, inshallah. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. I also want to hear from Anne on your experience, learning about the difference, and what was that like for you, especially as a convert. That must have been interesting.
Yeah, so it was interesting, because when I first really started to study Islam, the first exposure was with Shia Islam, because I was really into learning about Iran. So when I was first learning about Islam, I was learning about things that I didn't realize were specifically Shia practices, like praying on a turba, or like a piece of clay or a piece of earth. So I thought that was just, something that was just a Muslim thing rather than specifically a Shia thing. But then as I learned more, I didn't realize this at the time, but most of my sources of knowledge were coming from a Sunni perspective. And so when I actually converted, I kind of just by default became Sunni, because that's what I had learned. And I knew there was a difference, but I thought between, Sunni and Shia, but I didn't even know about like the political, like the very basic, like political idea that Ali was, about like Ali being the Khalifa, or or inheriting the wilayat. So it wasn't until I had a Shia friend in college who told me, who taught me about Ashura, first of all, taught me different, like when we would talk about Islam, I would mention some things, and she said, oh, Shias, like they believe this, I remember we were talking about, chapter of the Quran, and I think I mentioned something about it, and she said, "Oh, that's actually that's the Sunni perspective. The Shia perspective is actually this." And I had no idea. But at that point, I was still very young in my Islam and still kind of trying to figure out where I was. So I guess I didn't really think about it that much. The difference between Sunni and Shia, I was just trying to kind of get the basics, find my place in it. And then when I was in grad school, learning, doing Islamic studies, I think that's when I really wanted to learn more about the differences between, I realized that what I was doing, it was Sunni, and I wanted to kind of learn more about this vast, what I thought of as other Shia Islam. So I did a lot of reading. I didn't really know of any. I didn't have many Shia friends. I didn't really know of any Shia centers or mosques that I could go to. So I did a lot of reading, and I learned about Karbala, and I was so moved by it that it just, I think it really changed my perspective on Islam. Now I see it as, a very big part of, maybe not so much my theology or faith, but definitely in how I behave as a Muslim. Seeing, the sacrifices that Imam Hussein gave, that the martyrs of Karbala gave, that Zainab in particular gave. I was just so moved that, they were so willing to give up everything to speak truth to power, and to do what they truly felt was right, even though they were against, the Khalifa, the most powerful person in the Islamic world. So now, when I am involved in social justice work, or kind of just anything, reading about current events today, just thinking about how, wow, there was the saying that I mentioned in my bayan, that I believe is attributed to Ali Shariati. I think Ayatollah Khomeini also said it. I don't know where it actually originated, but the saying is, every day is Ashura, every land is Karbala, meaning that, these kinds of injustices, but also these people fighting against injustice, happens every day and everywhere. This is seen in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Standing Rock, in 2016, and the continued fight for, land rights and environmental, saving the environment. It can be seen everywhere. And whenever I see these injustices, good versus evil, it's everywhere in life, and it brings me back to Karbala. And I am so grateful for learning about Karbala, because it's really, it shaped my thinking. It's encouraged me as a Muslim to do more, do better.
Sister Shabnam, how do you relate the events of Karbala specifically to what's going on today with the Black Lives Matter movement?
It is something that I think of Zainab, and to be quite honest with you, I sometimes feel like I'm at a loss. I just don't feel like I can. What can I do? What is it that I can do to do my part? And I feel guilty sometimes, and this pandemic doesn't help. I have elderly parents in my house, so I don't go out. How do I let my sisters and brothers in the Black community know I'm with them? because I don't leave the house. I have to protect my own elders right now. And so I feel hopeless. But let me tell you, there has never been a moment that the sacrifices of the day of Ashura and the days following the 10th of Muharram, and Zainab and her nephew Ali ibn al-Hussein, how they stood up against these tyrants and how they were not afraid. And I have to say, today I heard a khutbah, and I want to quote, and it's Sayyid Qazwini's khutbah today, and he for Jum'ah, and he said, you know, there is something about Imam Hussein's message that resonates with everything. And the most important part, he said, was reforming. Do we think about reforming what is going on today? And it brought me back to, wow, if Martin Luther King could see what is going on 57 years later, and he dreamt of his children not being judged by the color of their skin, but by their character. And you think character is so important. And when Allah in the Quran, at so many different places, says, you know, Islam is easy. Just do good. Be kind to your neighbor. Treat your women right. Do this, do that. That is all good. And then I look around me and I tell you, Hasna, your question was about Black Lives Matter, but I look at Yemen, right. and these are Muslims killing Muslims, and it's just mind-boggling to me. And you know, I think, wow, if it's happening today, why are people it's so hard for people to believe it happened during the Umayyad and it happened during the Abbasid Empire. It happens all the time. Americans are killing Americans, no matter what color of skin it is. And it's sad. It really is sad. And I honestly, yesterday, I was feeling this sense of hopelessness. And then Said's lecture today gave me hope, because he said, we have to have hope and optimism, he said, because truth will always prevail and falsehood will be abolished. It might take time. Maybe we don't see it in our lifetime. And that's when I realized Dr. King's message was maybe for his grandchildren, because his children are not seeing this.
Right.
You know, so that was my contemplation.
You know, about
oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne.
I was gonna say about the feeling hopelessness. I get that too, but it's also, I think that's why, to me, that Zainab is so inspiring, because you know, we don't all have to be like Hussein, like literally giving our lives. Zainab, you know, she didn't have that luxury. She was, you know, left to mourn, and I'm sure she felt hopeless after, especially, you know, the night after Ashura, when she was left in charge of all the women and his children, and when she was being taken to Damascus, and they were in the dungeon. You know, I'm sure there was a lot of hopelessness, and the only thing that she could do was to speak up and to remember. And you know, those are all things that, you know, even if we can't leave the house or, you know, physically participate in, you know, the things that we want to, we can speak up and we can remember. And I think that's, you know, it might not seem like a lot, but you know, it's because of Zainab that we know about Karbala today. You know, it's you know, this idea of witnessing. I mean, that's built. It's the first pillar of faith, shahada. Being able to witness, to bear witness, and to speak out. I think that's, you know, that is something that we can always do.
And I would like to end with just 2 points here. One point is, that's why things like voting is so important. Right. You know, please, everybody, put it in your calendars, November 3rd. You take the day off if your company doesn't give you the day off, but please vote. And secondly, I've lost my train of thought, but one was voting and the other, it'll come to me, I'm sure. continue.
Sure. Samia, did you want to say something?
On this theme or a question of like why it is actually so important for us to remember our history accurately and truthfully. I have been for the last 2-3 weeks actually part of this virtual civil rights journey as part of it's been organized through the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which is an interfaith Muslim Jewish group. And one of the things that I was learning about, I think it was just last week, we were learning about the myth of the lost cause. Now, I'm an immigrant to the US, okay, so I didn't go to school here. I went straight into college. And so there's a lot about American history and American culture that I don't know. Like I didn't learn in school and so forth. So I'm still very much learning. And I never heard about this myth of the lost cause. Apparently, what it is that after the defeat of the Confederacy, the southern states primarily, they were like trying to figure out how to deal with and reconcile with this history of the Civil War, and being the people who were defeated and proved to be on the wrong side of history and so forth. And so they created this like whole story, or myth of the lost cause, where they basically retold, almost attempted to, and very successfully to a large extent, they succeeded in literally rewriting American history in a way where when we now, so many people, when they think about why the Civil War happened, like there are so many polls that show that a lot of Americans don't realize that the main cause and reason the Civil War happened was slavery. Most people think it was an issue of states' rights. They think it was an issue of the North and the South having political differences, and the South, trying to defend itself and so forth from invasion and having a hostile takeover by the North, and went, and it made me think about how, like there's this like this sense of denial, right, in this story around the injustice that was committed by us as Americans, in terms of the evil of slavery that was happening, and trying to distance ourselves from that and not even acknowledge that was something that we participated in. And then as I was listening to your khutbah, Sister Shabnam, about what happened in Karbala and how ugly and disgusting that was. And it was all Muslims, we were all Muslims. There was no Shia Sunni at that time. No one thought of themselves as Shia or Sunni. So we were all Muslims, acknowledging, calling ourselves Muslims, and then behaving in such disgusting ways, where, we're like literally participating in the murder of innocent people, including the family of the Prophet. Like just how disgusting that is, and now we don't want to remember that, and we want to distance ourselves from that. So like for me, there's this very strong parallel that is emerging in my mind between how, with the myth of this lost cause, the white people try to distance themselves from their participation in slavery and the Civil War and so forth. And now it's like the Sunni world is trying to like erase all this ugly history of how Muslims acted, and just not even like remember it. It's just,
It calls to mind like how people are currently trying to take these offensive statues down all across America, and then other people are in denial, or maybe blissfully ignorant, and want to stay that way. But I think there's actually pain in that. You know, when you stay blissfully ignorant, you are actually suffering because you are disconnected from the truth. And yes, it's true. When you first learn about the real history, it is painful. You will experience cognitive dissonance. You will feel uncomfortable. You will feel guilty. You'll feel horrible. But on the other side of that is such freedom, and such connection, and so much agency and power, because really, even in learning, you know, from this book Destiny Disrupted, learning about Islamic history and learning about just the vast diversity of Islam that existed pre-colonialism. You know, it was very recently that a lot of the diversity in Islam was killed off, quite literally, because of colonialism, and because of one brand of Islam being aligned with a capitalist, you know, uh, what's the word? Colonial adventure. It erased a lot of our history, and what we get from this is that we suffer. We suffer from not getting that closeness and connection to the Prophet and to the Prophet's family, peace be upon them all. We suffer, you know, even in terms of Sufi Islam. Like, there's so much of Sufi Islam that used to be a part of considered part of the mainstream, but now it's considered a sect, and now it's considered a separate thing. And so we really do miss out as Muslims when we don't know these other parts of ourselves. And this is why I really appreciate, you know, all of you coming together. You know, in our Jummah circles, we get to look at all of our faces. We get to hear all of the voices, and we get to see the diversity and experience the diversity of our ummah. So I want to thank you guys again for doing this. And I want to also ask you, what is something that you wish people would know, or maybe a misconception or two that you'd like to clear up? But what is something you wish people would know about Shia Islam or about Sunni Islam?
I think, I guess I would say to other Sunni Muslims, you know, this is something I had to learn, because Sunni Islam is, you know, the majority among Muslims. Like, just there are just a lot more Sunni Muslims than there are Shia Muslims in the world, except for, you know, like places in Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan. But for the most part, and in America included, the great majority of Muslims here are going to be Sunni. I would remind them that Sunni Islam is not the only way to look at Islam. That there is, like you said, you know, like aspects of Sufism that were, you know, considered mainstream are now considered, you know, Sufi, specifically Sufi. You know, love of the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is not just a Shia thing; it's a Muslim thing. So to not, you know, see Sunni Islam as, you know, the only way, and to, you know, I would encourage Sunnis to, you know, look more into, you know, Shia belief, look into, if not Shia belief, then, you know, look more into the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, because, you know, it is part of our history, it's part of our theology to love, you know, to love and honor the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family, the people who he loved. So just kind of acknowledge that, and for people that say that they are just Muslim, you know, a lot of times people that say they are just Muslim, you know, actually are Sunni, and they might not even realize it. You know, that's not always the case, of course. But to, you know, for people to think about how if you are Sunni, then you do have you do have Sunni privilege, essentially. in the U.S., in a lot of places, Sunnis, sometimes it can be as bad as mass killings of Shias. But even if there's not mass killings of Shias, just the idea that Sunni Islam is the default, and seeing Shia Islam as something else or something lesser. I would just encourage Sunnis to think about that, to realize that they have this privilege, and to learn more about their history, learn more about the Ahlul Bayt, maybe just learn more if they want to go deeper into it, learn more about Shia theology, learn more about Sunni theology. Just learn more, read more, be more aware. It will only be good for you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne. And then Sister Shabnam?
So I remembered my other thing is make sure you fill out your census.
Yes, yes.
So my civic duty is vote and fill out your census.
And for the vote too, if you want to fill out your ballot, early voting ballot, you can turn it in person just to make sure that it goes through. So if you're worried about the mail and the post office being sabotaged, you still can drop that off and get your vote in. Inshallah.
Yeah, very good. So I'm humbled by what Anne said, really. And I think if there is any parting words here, we as Muslims should realize that there are many things that create who we are. When we look deeper within ourselves, there are so many things that make us who we are, whether it's culture or language or race, whatever it may be. A faith, and especially the Muslim faith, transcends beyond that. But when we go to our mosques and our centers, we bring our cultures into sometimes the faith. And we forget what is faith, what is culture, what is the real faith. I would encourage everyone and invite everyone to look within themselves to say what our forefathers used to do to embrace their faith and understand it may not be applicable today. Especially for those of us who live in the United States or the Western Hemisphere. There are so many things the message of Karbala brings, especially the message of justice and equality. So we have a tendency within our own mosques to discriminate. If you don't speak my language, if you don't whatever, if you don't like my kind of food, it's so ridiculous. And I invite people within the Shia community and others to start taking a look and dig deeper within yourself to realize, why am I here? What is my ultimate goal? Why is it that I, on the day of Ashura, visit a cemetery? Why? That's my final resting place. What am I going to go with when I'm done here? So how am I going to live my life here? Let's start taking stock of that and inviting everyone within our circle and embracing everyone's perspective, because God created us different. He knew we could live together. He wouldn't have made people who are different, or lands that look different, and cultures that are different, and languages that are different. The idea is brotherhood, sisterhood, and we completely miss the essence of all of that. And if we just go back to the history of the Prophet and the advent of Islam, what types of people were some of his strongest companions? If we just reflect on his idea of unity and embracing people with different backgrounds, perhaps we will get off our high horse and start to become better people. Inshallah.
Inshallah. And that really, that makes me think of the tactic of the devil, of shaitan, of saying, I am better, I am made out of fire, Adam's made out of clay. It really is the original sin to say that we are better than another. And it also, if you want to look at history, divide and conquer tactics, that is how you weaken a people. And so if we as Muslims want to see the fate of Muslims all over the world improve, because Muslims in almost every country are suffering and have been suffering since the time of colonialism. We really have to change ourselves before God changes our condition. And you just look at, every single country that the British invaded. After they left, they set things up in a way that would cause civil war. You look at the way that people from Africa were brought to the US and purposely split up and placed together with other people from other African countries so that they wouldn't be able to communicate in their language, they wouldn't be able to organize, they wouldn't be able to unify. And I think that is something we really have to keep in mind, is that, if there ever is a force that is calling you to separate, calling you to divide, calling you to put yourself above another, or anything like that, really question who is motivating that call, and what does Allah actually want from us. Samia, were there any questions from the Facebook Live? I see some comments, but no questions. Okay. And then Samia, I just wanted to ask, in your work with the interfaith community, I know you've witnessed a lot of really difficult conversations, and you've seen some stuff go down. You've also seen some really great breakthroughs happen. And so I wanted to know, if you had any tips, working in the interfaith space that we could apply to the intra-faith space, and inshallah have more and more Shia Sunni unity, and have all types of Muslims, because there also isn't just one type of Shia. There are different types, and also different sects other than these two main ones. So any tips that you have for us?
Yeah, the very cool thing, I think, is that ultimately the keys to creating healthy relationships are the same, regardless of what kinds of bridges you're trying to cross in terms of differences, because there's so many kinds of differences based on which we tend to split ourselves, whether it's Shia Sunni, or Muslim Jewish, or fat people versus thin people, or like we just come up with a million different reasons by which to divide ourselves. But anytime you want to come back together and learn to love each other more and better, the basics are the same. It's like the first most important thing is just to sort of do the best you can to sort of put aside, at least for a little while, what you think about the other side especially, but also about your general notions of reality and so forth, and just focus on listening and learning from the other person what their perspective is. Like one of the things that Sister Shabnam, you shared both during your khutbah and earlier today, you said that fasting is seen in general in the Muslim community as something that's very joyful and uplifting and spiritual. And so to fast on the day of mourning is not seen as something that that would be appropriate to do. And that immediately, like, gave me an insight into why a Shia person might choose not to fast. And I'm like, if I believe that, if I held that perspective on fasting, I wouldn't fast on the day of Ashura either. So it's like what when we can like really listen to the other person's perspective and just hear it from their perspective and take that in, then we can begin to empathize. And even if I don't end up agreeing with you, at least then I understand, and it allows that opportunity and opening for us to love each other.
Yeah, and in your bayan, you actually talked about your perspective or your personal practice on fasting on Ashura. Can you explain that for anyone who hasn't seen it?
Yeah, so I do generally fast on Ashura if I'm able. you know, but I also do, you know, mourning practices related to the death of Imam Hussein. And I personally don't, you know, I don't feel like this is a contradiction because one, because I personally don't see fasting as necessarily a joyful thing. I think more just a neutral act of worship. But also because, you know, acknowledging that, you know, joy and sorrow are often, you know, can coexist, often do coexist. You know, we can acknowledge that, you know, the belief that Ashura was, you know, acknowledge it as the day that Moses and the children of Israel were freed from slavery, while also acknowledging that it was the day of the Battle of Karbala, and that these things, you know, such as life, it is often together with joy and sorrow. You know, acknowledging the sorrow, acknowledging the joy, hoping for, you know, better days ahead. So that's, you know, that's something, I think that position is, I feel like it's a middle ground, and it feels right to me. I know, you know, that's not how other people will do it, but that's the justification for why I do it.
I really appreciated your explanation because it showed how to have good boundaries and also have respect for people who are different. And I think, you know, one of the things that we stress a lot at the Women's Mosque of America is mental health. And I think in a lot of Muslim majority countries, you do see, you know, a lack of boundaries, a culture of lack of boundaries, the inability to say no sometimes. And there are pros and cons to this, of course. But I think when you do practice good boundaries and you know who you are and you own who you are, and you know that just because someone disagrees with you doesn't erase who you are, you're then able to exist and coexist with others in a healthier way, where you don't feel as threatened by differences. So I really appreciate, Anne, that you do, you know, acknowledge a side that's different from your own while also honoring your own beliefs, because I think it's a great model of how to coexist. Does anyone have any final thoughts or anything that they would like to share before we end?
I just want to say how this is so wonderful, really. I obviously don't know the folks that have joined on Facebook and maybe the ones who will watch even after this when you post this. But it really, it almost lets the guard off, the guardrails off, you know? You've created a safe space to have these kinds of conversation. And even the ones who are more passionate and more, you know, vocal about their perspectives. I tend to be more even keeled, but, you know, heck, I know people who are more passionate, you know, and they, you know, they will tell you their perspective in a very strong and powerful way. Wonderful. Our job, my job is to, as Samia said, be a good listener, supportive, because, you know, I want to quote something that when Imam Ali was a Khalifa, and he had sent his ambassador to Egypt. His name was Malik al-Ashtar. And he gave Malik a letter on how to govern the people of Egypt. Because, and there was a phrase in that letter, and that letter is, by the way, in a book called the Nahj al-Balagha, also known as Peak of Eloquence, the letters of and sermons of Imam Ali. He says in the letter, you will encounter people who are brothers of yours in faith and equals in humanity. Treat them the same. Be just, be a just ruler. And so to me, I'm like, this is life. This is the code of life everyone should live. You know, we are going to have our different perspectives on life, our different places we worship and different, you know, foods we eat. But, you know, at the end of the day, we are all one creation of Allah.
I think it was Rumi who said there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground, right? So as many ways and humans as there are as many ways as there are to legitimately worship God who created us. You know, we are, these days I've been thinking a lot about the Prophet's hadith. Even if the end of the world comes and you're planting a seed, keep planting the seed. And I've been reflecting a lot about seeing myself as the seed. And, you know, because I think it can be overwhelming, especially during these times with everything that's going on, to think like, okay, I'm going to plant, you know, the seed in society. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Even if you yourself are the seed, you are worthy of planting and growing. And so I thank everybody for participating in this, and everybody who joined us and shared their comments and reflections. But if you guys see, there's a lot of love coming your way. So inshallah, you know, this is just one conversation. In no way do we want to say, you know, there's one Shia view, one Sunni view. This is just one conversation. And of course, there's a lot of nuance that we're not hearing here. But the idea is to spark your curiosity and get you to learn more. And again, I want to keep pushing that book, History or Destiny Disrupted, because it really is such an eye-opening experience to learn the history of Islam, and to also learn not only the history of the Sunni Shia split, but to learn about the people who were involved, who did truly love and respect each other despite what was going on. And I think if we as Muslims want to honor their legacy, we'll find that we'll be more united than divided, inshallah. All right, thank you everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.